Okay, this professor student back again. We're going to be doing one of my infinity tables. Uh, it's going to be built about on the size for entryway table, maybe a sofa table, so go behind the sofa and things like that. Don't have much details here yet, but in a few seconds here, I'll be able to post what the colors, the layout, and the design, and show you guys step by step why I do what I'm doing, what I'm trying to accomplish. All right, tune in. So here's pretty much the layout of what the table is going to look like. Um, just a general idea, which is kind of important. I like to lay it out first, kind of get an idea, and then kind of think about what the tools I'm going to have to use to accomplish what I'm trying to accomplish. Of course, I got my electric planer here. I got my belt sander, my orbital sander, because I'm not going to fill. These are a little bit different heights. I could have laid out the planer in the beginning to get the make them all the exact same heights, but this kind of wood was pretty warped up a little bit, so I'm basically trying to just do a shortcut. Go ahead and just do the pour, and then just worry about planing the top of it to make it nice and smooth. Of course, I got my other saw over there to hit my edges to square it up. Most important thing, of course, is your sandpaper, ventilation, proper masking. Is important. This is pretty much just a rough sanding, seeing what my wood is looking like, what I'm working with. Just kind of going through, also knocking the bark off the edges, the loose bark, checking out some of the grain patterns, the different colors that are in there, the reds and the yellows and the browns. Good stuff to pull out while I'm thinking of the resin color that I want to use. Here's another cut. I'm just kind of doing the same thing, showing you what the different lines are in there also. And as I said before, I like the wood that's the most messed up. So the more jacked up the wood is, the more I like, because you can just get more features out of it when you're casting it. This is just an extra piece that I'm just going to cut up and throw in the center somewhere. As you can see, just got my chisel out, taking off some of the bark. Okay, so just kind of getting back as a general design. Sorry I didn't pan out a little bit further, but so we have the kind of like the design here, using the final layout, the type of the wood, got our trim in there, trimming it out. This, like I said, we're just going through the steps, fabricating, making the adjustments, clamp the parts into your mold, prefabricated mold, verify the design and the pattern, and then obviously the last thing you want to do is pour your resin into your molds. And like I said, having, I don't know, for at least for me, writing it out, kind of like that way it's easier for me to kind of like have a plan instead of just thinking about it in my head and kind of just going through there. I'm just kind of highlighting some other parts that are important to me as far as fabricating your design and stuff like that. So when you clamp your parts in, just different stuff that's important. Good clamping is good because you don't want your woods. You don't want your different woods to start floating up and shifting on you. So you don't want to just set them in there. Some people like to just try to tack them down. That's kind of risky. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It's just easier to clamp them. Figure out a way to clamp them. If you're worried about the wood, using wood on wood, you can also find pieces of cardboard or pieces of foam that you could put in between your clamp and your wood. If you're worried about extra resin like seeping up and gluing stuff into place, that's just pretty much there. Like I said, with the clamping and verifying the design and your pattern before you get going, makes life a whole lot easier. decide what colors. Like I said, we'll be pointing out the colors that are in the wood, and going from there. And then last, like I said, the resin design. Different colors. We're going to go with a burgundy on this one. It will complement the wood a whole lot more than just going with a solid something else out of the box, like a black. Um, once again, just kind of like showing a little bit of the part I zoomed in too far on my whiteboard, so I apologize for that. Anyway, so we're back at I'm back just basically showing you kind of layout. And if you see on the top there, I have like a little shim, and that's a shim of the wood that I'm working with. It's important to have like extra pieces um, of what you're working with. Maybe take like a little sliver or something like that. It helps with staining or oil, putting oil on or something like that. So you kind of get an idea of what oil or stain that is going to look like on your wood without actually putting it on there first. You can kind of see it, but the top piece there looks like a little bit of glue. I had to like glue a section there, just pre-hold it together because it actually snapped off during after sanding. I dropped it and it fell off. It's good to have some little bit of tooling there, angle irons or L brackets, or you know, I mean, L rulers, whatever people want to call them, the T rulers, or people call them different stuff, to help square up your things. Because when you put it in the mold, you want to make sure that it's square. If not, you're gonna have gaps in the back, and end up having to do a whole lot more trimming than what you want to do. And like I said, just kind of get an idea of what I'm doing, whether I want stuff closer or further, just to make sure I get the length down and the width down that I want to accomplish. And also on my infinity tables, is what I'm pointing out is because I put a big round edge on the front and in the back, and then I leave the sides square. That way, when you're looking off one edge or you're looking over the edge, you don't really see the edge of the table. It kind of like rolls over. That's the whole infinity table idea. So you can either just do one side, or do the backs or do two sides. Um, I just chose to do both sides. It just seemed like it'd be easier since this was like a sofa table. And you can flip around either way. And basically, the dimensions that I settled on was pretty much 15 inches by 43 inches, and of course, it's an inch and 3/4 thick. Later on, I will kind of discuss on how that inch and 3/4 ended up being a little bit less. I kind of went overboard on a little bit of sanding, had to have it planed down, and I lost a lot of thickness there. Also lost a lot of some features, important features. So that's one thing to be aware of. Be careful on where you're sanding. Don't get too involved into one little area where you find out you end up screwing yourself because you went too deep. Took too much material off. Okay, so just getting the deal there, just kind of getting an idea. That's the tool there that I'm going to use to do my corners. Just kind of get an idea of what it looks like and how it's going to look on the table being cut. And so that's a piece of just a little square, half by half, and so I'm kind of just eyeballing of what kind of a cut it's going to give me. That way, I kind of got an idea of how it's going to look on my table. And so I'm basically going to end up using these wooden dowels as my spacers. Um, and that's kind of also while I'm kind of doing this is because I want a little bit of I want a space to go all the way around this table, and the space will be resin. And the reason why is because on this infinity table, you want the top of the wood to round off into the resin. That's my idea of why I'm kind of going with showing the different dowel sizes from, I think that's 3/4 to, I'm not 3/4, 3/8 versus half of an inch, seeing which gap I want, because how much resin I want to show, because the top of the radius of that cutter is going to be wood. The middle or bottom, of course, is going to be, of course, the resin. So that's one thing that's really important when you're making one of these tables is you want to be able to determine how much wood versus resin you want to show. I like it to be wood. You're seeing a lot of the wood, and then it flows into or rolls over into the resin. So it's more of a preference thing, but that's the idea between that, which dowel for spacing or how much spacing you want to have. So now we're into the point of cutting our mold. So we want to be able to basically take size of our table, which is 43 inches, and then our dowels each side, and also we're factoring in the thickness of the wood itself for making the mold. The mold's 3/4 inch melamine, so you got to factor in that. So that's basically where you're getting your 43 plus 75, 75 because you got one on each side. So your total that you're going to have to cut your base, the bottom piece is going to be your 44 and a half. And of course, width-wise, you're doing the same idea, 15 plus, your three quarters that way. So you want a 6. So your total base, the bottom base or whatever you want to put it, of your mold should be 16 and 7/8 by 44 and a half. It's basically the idea there. Excuse some of the camera work. I'm trying to hold and point at the same time. I want to use this section. As you can see, I got a little cut in there. That's not going to be a big deal. I'm just going to fill it with silicone, and I should be fine caulking. It'll be fine. It won't leak. Just showing you the type of caulking I'm going to use. Once you get it set for the base, pre-drill my holes because I'm going to use just regular finish screws in there. Pre-drilling them helps out a lot, so you don't have to worry about cracking your mold when you're trying to drill through it. Again, laying it out inside there. Once your mold is complete with the sides, I usually make the sides about 3 inches. It's just kind of the standard of what I do. As you can see, I got my dowels in the sides right there because that's my spacing that I want. Make sure you pull those out before you pour. Make sure you pull your dowels out before you pour. You don't want to glue your dowels into place. That would be disastrous. So that's basically the idea there with the mock-up. And if you notice, I'm not putting dowels on the front side. And that's basically because I changed my mind a little bit. I think I wanted to go on the back on one side. I wanted to make the sides different from each other, just for a different look. So on one side, you should get wood going into resin, and on the other side should just be all wood. Just to give it a different look. Sealing it really good is important. That's that was a cut before that we seen that I sealed all up. Sometimes I over caulking. It helps. It's better to have too much sealant in there than not enough, because a leaky mold is nothing nice. It's almost impossible to stop. Just putting a little bit of mold release in there. It's kind of like a 50-50 actually, because this is a slick surface. And I say it over and over, resin does not like slick, smooth surfaces. It needs something to grab onto. And usually if I'm doing a foam mold, I'll just leave it out. But since I'm not, I'm using this. It still could break apart, and you not have to really necessarily worry about it. But sometimes it's 50-50. Sometimes it wants to grab it. Sometimes it doesn't. So I put mold release in there just as a precaution. And mainly I spray the mold release into the corners, all the corners, because that's where I'm putting the caulking and stuff. So you can never have too much mold release. This is stuff that I use. I just kind of like this stuff better. It's a good multi-use, but there's plenty of stuff. You can just put wax in there. Wax works fine. Um, any type of mold release, you should be fine. But this stuff is an aerosol, so make sure you're well ventilated when you're using it. It's pretty powerful. I usually you can let it sit for. I mean, you can read the label to see recommended. I usually do a 24 hour just to make sure that it sits in there, and I mean it dries up and cures and kind of like sits where it wants. That's just me. You don't necessarily have to wait that long. I've known a couple of people who've sprayed it on there, a couple of hours or whatever, they're ready to go, and it's pretty much the same results. One thing I want to point out is you always want to have a good mask on, uh, just because of the fumes, or at least at worst case scenario, if you don't have a handy mask, make sure you're in a well ventilated area. Feel free to take it outside if you're doing a lot of stuff in your garage, like I do, because you don't want to deal with the dust. Make sure you have doors open, a lot of doors open. Um, So I kind of do a little bit of overkill. You only kind of literally do just do a once over. Sometimes I put a little bit more, but that's just me preference. These are the colors that I'm going to be using, implementing in this table to accomplish what I'm accomplish. Um, Going in there, start mixing. During the mixing process, of course, once you want to have a proper ventilation mask on, the other thing is what you want to concentrate on is don't just dump as far as your pigments go. Put a little bit, mix it a little bit, mix it a little bit, mix it to kind of get close to what you want to go get to. Also, take into consideration that this bucket is you're going to fill this bucket, as you can see, like let's say halfway full, and your mold is not going to be this deep, so your colors will look darker in the bucket than they will in your mold, depending on, of course, the depth of the mold. So you need to take that in some strong consideration. Don't just feel like something is, oh, that's starting out to be too dark, and then you go and you pour it, and then you figure out it's actually way too light. And vice versa. Don't think it's too light, and then all of a sudden you keep going, it's too dark, and then, or it's you think it's going to be too light, and then you pour it, and it's actually too dark. Just kind of getting the last little bits of resin out of the bottles. That's just me being cheap and making sure I got the right mix. As you can see, I put it up against a piece of wood, just kind of get an idea, but the most important thing is to use a shim. Um, okay, once again, like I said, it's important to use a shim of the wood that you're using, just as a, so you'll know what the stain will look like um, on your wood or your project before you're actually applying it, the full, couple of gallons. And that way you'll know if it's the right color that you want, if it's too dark or too light. You can fix that off your different shims to get the color that you want versus dumping your whole resin in on your mold and then you figure out it's not what you wanted. So that's why I'm just basically going through here and checking my consistency. Yes, the dowel that I'm using is lighter, But I plan on kind of going dark with this anyway, so I'm just making sure that the burgundy look that I'm wanting is there, kind of going back and forth as far as I could add more of the pigment to just get me there, but putting in a little bit of a pigment at each time is pretty much the smartest thing to do versus just dumping a bunch of pigment in there and, dealing with the end result. Because once you add both of your A and B combinations in there, of course, you're going to thin out your mix again, and it's going to become not necessarily lighter, but thinner, so it'll be more translucent. So that's important that you want to get the dark. So you'll see me here double mixing. You want to make sure you have 2 clean buckets when you're doing this. You can even wipe one bucket out with alcohol to make sure that it's nice and clean. Make sure you get all the alcohol out of there, of course. But you want to dump it in one bucket, mix it thoroughly, and then you can dump it back into your original bucket. And that's just basically making sure that all the resin is mixed in. Unmixed resin, obviously, it won't cure as well. Or you'll have sections of it where it's always going to be sticky or tacky. And then obviously laying it into your mold. So kind of doing it in sections, not just pouring it all in one area, kind of a little bit in, and going to different areas or sections of the mold, pouring a little bit here, moving around, pouring it there. And that's basically kind of making sure, it helps with making sure that your table is level. If you're just pouring it in on one side and it pours, to one side or the other, it's kind of a little bit harder to see where your low spots are. So, because you're going to have to basically shim up the bottom of your mold to try to get it as level as possible. And then I just have like a little floating piece there. Now, it's lately there's been a little bit of controversy over using the blowtorch to get rid of your bubbles. Some people are just basically overfilling the molds, letting all the bubbles come to the top, and then of course you just sand off or machine off or grind off the excess resin, of course, and you get rid of the bubbles that way. Some people are just saying that if you just let it sit for a while, the bubbles will float up to the top. And then obviously a lot of people like using the torch method, so I would say it's kind of up to you. Adding extra little colors here, going in with some white on the edges just for blending. That comes in later. It'll have like a nice effect. You'll see later in the video, I ran into a problem with this. Everything was there. I got a little bit over carried away with my sanding, and I took off. Once I realized what I did, my table became uneven, and I had to sand it down. And of course, I lost a lot of my effects that were there along the wood edges, which was pretty sad because it looked really, really nice before I had to sand it down. Most of the time when I'm using my effects, I use a different type of resin. I don't use the same because as you know, and if you don't know, you'll learn when you're just kind of putting in effects, after a while it's sitting, they'll blend into each other. So instead of having the nice, cool, marbly, granite looking swirls, it ends up kind of blending, or it'll sink to the bottom. If you're familiar with, the thicker your mix is, as far as you put more pigments in there, versus one of your mix that only has a little bit of pigment in there, the heavier mix will float down to the bottom, or sink down to the bottom. Sorry, not float, it'll sink down to the bottom. So usually I use like a faster curing resin when I'm doing my effects, and that prevents that. Off to the sanding phase. Okay, my stuff is cured. Wait a good solid week for that, maybe a little bit longer. So you're just sanding it down, starting with the heavy grit. I'm just getting rid of the main bulk. What I did first, actually, you can kind of see my marks in there. I used my one of my heavier cutters, and that's how I got rid of the bulk. You can see the big strips being ripped off there. And now I'm just coming back with the sander to clean it up. There you go, the end product with the basically an 80 grit. Pretty much going to take it all the way down to probably, I believe it's 2,000, 3,000 grit because I wanted to get it really, really smooth. But this is after 80 grits pass. One of the things I like about, like I said, you use your when you do your resin. I like to kind of try to mix the resin that complements the wood. So if the wood has a lot of like really light browns or some reds or you'll see some blacks or whatever, that's the way I kind of like to do my resin is try to come up with a mix or a blend that kind of like they feed off of each other. I don't like to just do all blue or all black. I feel like you kind of like lose something. Even if you want to do like a blue river table, you can still add a little bit of, effects. Even if you want to stay minimum to kind of like, oh, this is in there, you know, this is in my wood. Or even if you're doing the all black, you can still kind of put some highlights in there. Not a lot, but something in there to complement. So I'm just going further down to my 220 to my three. I think it's 320, um, and going on my way to the 400s, 600s to 1,000. So this is my 400 grit that you're looking at now. Actually, I think I used a 600 on this. Um, I was just kind of using my finish sander there to just kind of see if it gave me a little bit better results on the wood sections. Um, there'll still be a little bit of problem areas that you can see here and there, the little holes. Sometimes that's just unavoidable. There's hidden, unless you're using a vacuum chamber, it's possible that you're going to get those anyways. Those are just air pockets. Sometimes you don't, like I said, that's why some guys, they'll overfill their molds to try and prevent that. But we can fix those later. But here we are going to our final stage of one of the big things that really, really huge on, and that's finishing your project. So I have a lot of custom frames made for me by a guy, Barnes Welding, and he does a lot of my custom frames. And it really doesn't cost that much for you to invest in that to have a good, nice, solid product. Because to me, the most important thing is to finish your project. So if you can't have one made, like I said, this is my particular design I like to use. You can always find them. There's a lot of companies that sell, frame, and then you just got to either powder coat it or paint it up. Either way, you'll appreciate what you've done a whole lot more than just finding some random frame or random piece of wood base and throwing it on there. And you'll have this really, really nice table with an ugly base. So finishing your projects is like a big pet peeve of mine. So look into it. Figure out a design you like, figure out somebody who can make it, do it for you, or there's a company out there, the internet, everything's on the internet, you can find it. So um, that's just my particular design going through and showing you what I like. The bottom part there, obviously, is where I like to put the basket shelves on there. I think it's simpler than making up little drawers. Baskets is kind of like an easier thing for people to use pull out a basket, throw it in there. Drawers sometimes wear out over time. Then I'll finish it up, and then let's see what's there. So here's pretty much the finished product. So I did cut out a little piece of wood to put down there on the bottom shelf. There's my baskets in there. I did a nice textured brownish paint for the frame itself, and then you can see the table, the infinity table, is polished out. I used some Odie's oil on that, along with some basic other oils, finishing oils, to get the nice finish and the glare on that. I also put like a little foam, not really foam, a velvet foam pad in between the table and the frame. I had some pads underneath the bottom there so it wouldn't scratch up the floors. Like I said, in between the frame and the table, I have a pad. Yeah, so I use basically a minerals oil and an Odie's oil on that, just because I wanted to really have the really nice oil finish on there. But you can still see the beautiful effects in there. Came out really, really nice. And as you can see, the resin and the wood blend together. One of them's not too much over the top from the other. They hang out and dance. I was able to keep a little bit of my effects in there, the white effects, which was good. I didn't lose too much. There was a lot more in there, which made a little bit of cooler. You can see, because I use a different type of resin, you can still see the white lines in there. Different effects. You can still see some of my effects. And like I said, that's by using two different style resins, or different cure rates. You want to use a fast cure rate if you want to keep crazy designs in there. But that's all it in pretty much a nutshell. And that's the resin table.